Today we're going to create a huge regional multi-facility police headquarters in Cities Skylines 2. So the last two episodes focused on some detailed government buildings, then in the following episode I introduced some improved postal services within a light industry development. As we expand the city services with today's regional police build, it will feature some custom jail facilities, some outdoor exercise areas, a police academy, indoor shooting range, helicopter pads, dedicated maintenance buildings and headquarter facilities, a pool of reflection and various support and administration buildings will also bind the development together. There's a lot of detail in this one, so stick around to the end and I think you'll all enjoy it. Same as we've done in previous episodes, I'm going to name a couple of the city areas. First up is the suburban downtown, that's the mixed use development. I'm going to call that after Hakan the Swed, that is a YouTube member, so this area is going to be called the Hakan Commercial Hub. I like that one, cheers for the ongoing support, mate. Next up is the country club. That country club does need a bit of a tidy up. Just like the shipyard build, it's missing some surfaces and the trees have overgrown when my settings reset and re-enabled the tree growth. So that's a job for another day. Today we're going to get it named after our newest Patreon member, Just Max, so I'm going to call that the J-Max Country Club. Lovely. Thanks for joining, Max. Much appreciated, bud. Okay then, let's crack on with the build. The first job to do was really to decide where this build was going to go. There were a couple of candidates for this one, but I decided to get it in alongside the suburban downtown and across the road from some of the large emergency service buildings. We've got a big fire station and a medical clinic just across here, so I think in terms of the building size it did kind of fit in, and I think for the size of that build it either had to go alongside some commercial and service buildings or it had to go right out of town, you know, maybe off a highway, and I went for the former here. I'm going to have a single access road. I'd like to keep the entrance clear for emergency vehicles so they can get in and out unimpeded. I definitely don't want to create a rat run clogging up the road, so a little cul-de-sac here is going to be the plan. Now with that plonked down, it's always quite satisfying seeing them stream out the facility for the first time, isn't it? There will be quite a few supporting buildings in this build, and the first of them will be the new police academy. I'm going to use the Coda Park signature building for this one. It fits in fantastically well with the big police asset, but I need to get the colour right for this to work. The big bright yellow one is not what I'm after here. There's no way that I know to cycle through the variations until these types of buildings are plopped down, so yeah, the asset variation mod wasn't doing its thing here, so I'm going to have to just keep plopping it down and delete it, and we'll keep going until I get the primarily white one that I'm looking for. Once we have that down, we'll get all the commercial stuff off the buildings and we'll get the police badges plastered all over it. A sign or two maybe near the entrance pretty much takes care of that, and we'll repeat the process for some more buildings. For the next lot of buildings, I'll decide on the big office assets here. It's going to be the same idea as the Coda Park building. I'm looking for something to fit into the theme of the build, so really looking for a suitable white or maybe a mix of white and blue for down here. These buildings I can see as administration buildings, maybe some forensics or crime scene labs or something like that perhaps. They will of course need to be branded as police buildings just in case anyone was not aware, so we'll get all of these done. The signs snap on really nicely with the snap to surface option, and they go on real nice and easy, so there's no messing about here. At this point I'll get some parking in place. I'd like a mix of custom parking and the vanilla asset stuff I'm going to put in there as well just to mix things up a bit. At this point it's just a case of slotting in the big stuff, getting the layout down, and we'll make sure it fits in okay, and then later on we can complete it with the surface and the detailing work. I'm going to get on to the next set of buildings now, and for these I'm going to fuse some of these together, but let's check the spacing first and again get the basics of the parking sizing down too as well. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to push the two buildings at the back into the big 6x6 asset. There's no road access required here, so we should be good to go with a simple pushback. Let's get that police branding out again. I'm going to use a mix of wall signs, the ground and the roof assets for this one. I'm going to use the surfaces and create the outline for the heliport part of the build. I did have a bit of a concern about having the noise go in here, and that was more so if it was fully operational. But I did find an example of the LAPD Hooper heliport in LA, and that's pretty close to downtown LA in fairness. It's pretty much across the road. So I was happy to crack on with this in its current location. That heliport in LA actually features helicopter landing spots on the roof. Looks pretty cool, and I might do that on the next one. Getting the initial paths out to the heliport, just eyeballed it. I wasn't too precious on the spacing and the path sizing. If they come out a little irregular, then that's absolutely fine. I'll take them out at different angles, so it should look a little bit more interesting doing it like this. I did, however, want some uniformity on the square landing spots, so I created some squares with the path tool and snapping on, and where they come out not quite centre, you can just nudge them along and move it. And with them in place, I'm pretty happy with the positioning. I just used the same surface and create some perfect squares at the end of each path. One very important detail on any helicopter landing spot is the marking, so the pilots know where to land. So I'm going to grab the road marking net lanes from the extra detailing tools, and we'll draw out some circles. It's nice and easy with the continuous road marking tools and snapping. If you don't quite hit that 90-degree angle, it will come out a little janky, so it'll be a case of deleting and redrawing that. For the big H, you'll need to eyeball it. It will be a bit easier with snapping on, but sometimes it will not quite work out, so you might need to take some of the snapping options off, and you can toggle to existing object snapping and 90-degree angles as and when it's required. If you're not quite happy with what you've drawn, you can use move it and move multiple nodes if needs be, or if you just want to expand or shrink one element, you just pick a single node and do whatever's necessary to get the effect and the sizing you want. And I think that's a pretty nice feature for the build. There's still more to add though. I want to give it a dedicated headquarters, some maintenance buildings, and some nice lighting features so it can be operational 24/7. The next facility I'll get in place is an indoor shooting range. So I want to get all the options available here for the force to practice on. I'm going to create a pretty long building capable of handling some sniper practice. And due to the road orientation with these assets, the buildings unfortunately won't be operational, but it's probably not a bad thing as they are industry assets. They will have the water and electricity warnings icon on when I'm not hiding the UI, but I can live with that for a couple of buildings. So I just overlapped these a little bit and created that single long building along this minor road just behind the main facility. I think that's a pretty nice addition. The next facility that we're going to add will be the jail assets. So typically you would need to stick these on the side of the main building, snap them on. Here I've used Find It and Anarchy to situate them where I want. These won't be operational at the time of recording, but they might be by the time you watch this video, as just like the Postal Service garage assets in the light industry build, these add-on buildings are supposed to start working without being attached to the main building asset after the next patch. So I guess we'll need to hook up some paths or maybe roads. Don't know, we'll see how that pans out in the next week or so. Maybe we can get away with some invisible pathing, which might work. After getting a couple of these in place, I plan on connecting them together using a covered pathway. And I preferred to have used a completely secure covered walkway, but it's not in the game, so we'll just work with what we have. It will connect to the higher floor of the police headquarters directly to the first jail, and then I'll use the same asset and connect the other jails together. I'm going to have a total of 3 here, and I'll line up the existing concrete surface best I can. If nothing else, it'll give me a bit less surfacing work to do later. Keep giving me a slightly different colour concrete, so I'm just going to keep placing and deleting until I get the one I want. With the fencing removed, quick adjustment of the existing surfaces can give the impression that these were always connected together. While I'm at it, I'll pare back some of the surfaces on the outer element, and I'm going to expand the inner section closest to the HQ. I will be coming back to this in a minute and I'll be converting it to an exercise area. This is a secure facility, so of course the whole thing will need multiple perimeter fencings, and I'm going to use the high industrial option for that one. While it's still fresh in my mind, I'm going to jump back over to the heliports and add some smaller helicopter operation buildings. Couple of low res office buildings fitted in pretty nicely over here, and we'll be creating a larger aviation headquarters to go along with that pretty soon too. Swinging back over to the jails, I'm going to get the outline for the exercise yard in place. So I did need to redo the grass area at an appropriate size. Now in fairness, you probably might not have grass area accessible to inmates in jail, so we'll fence that off later on. The exercise area surface will need to match the existing concrete. Well, it doesn't need to, but I want it to, so it's just a case of drawing it back in. We'll have some custom basketball courts in here later, so keep an eye out for that. Back over at the shooting range facility, I'm going to add a small building asset, and this would be the fitness or gym area for our police force. No donuts allowed here. I landed on the matching asset from across the road, but I'll orientate it a little differently, and it won't be fused to anything else, so it should look like a different asset from most angles. I'm going to take this opportunity now and we'll just add the rest of the police branding to all of these main buildings. We'll use a nice mix of shapes and sizes here. That's almost all the buildings done. I do want to add a large aviation sort of division building, and I'm going to have that next to the helicopters. I can imagine that would be the regional HQ working closely with the air traffic control and maybe the airports. Again, I want the right complementary colours on this one, so a bit of plopping and deleting was required until I got the one I wanted. With that in place, I'll surface off the future car parks and have a little assessment of the build. It's always good to take a step back and take a few minutes and see if there's anything obvious that you want to add or you want to remove maybe before we start the detailing. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with most of it. I wanted to give full road access to every corner of the build, so I'm going to box it off with some small alley roads and access roads. Once that's done, I give the impression that there was road access to this jail facility as well by adding a vehicle barrier and a security checkpoint. At this point, I want to make the whole facility secure. So it's time to fence the whole thing off, and I'm going to use that high industry fencing again. Once the fencing's done, you'll see that it actually adds quite a bit of definition to the build, and it does of course give a definitive build area, which is handy because it's easy just to keep adding and building when you're having fun on it. With the perimeter in place, the build will need a bit of an internal tidy up, so I'll need to remove some fencing on assets where it just looks out of place. There's going to be quite a few places where the surfaces end abruptly, so as usual I'll pull these out to where they meet on the road as and when it's necessary. And it's usually needed when the building asset's been placed a bit further back from the road, just like the post office sorting facility from the other video, where I can see there were trees or bushes. I'll use the picker mod and we'll extend that greenery towards the road, and in effect we're just expanding the asset so it looks a little bit bigger. You can do the same with any other asset that's near the end there, so lighting props, benches, maybe even some signs can all be pushed a little bit further towards the road, and again just expanding that asset and making it look that bit bigger. There will be a couple of spots where paths don't exist. There I'm going to create an extended path network with the surface tool, and in conjunction with that we're going to add some invisible paths underneath, and that'll expand that path network, making everything nice and walkable. I am going to add some different surfaces, more for a splash of colour if nothing else. We use the dirt for the riverbed surfaces here. That helps break things up a little bit, but also gives some little areas where you can add some bushes or overgrowth, and it's always a pretty nice effect. Now it's time to add some detail and we can really personalise the build. We've got 3 elements here that I want to introduce to the development. The first is to add some character to the helicopter area. I need to first decide what asset to use for the helicopter maintenance, and I think the garaged warehouse was a good fit. I'm going to create a little parking area to the side, and then we'll add some decals. I think the slow down road markings along with the crossing and some warning decals are the right call here. Adding some service parking lots and a little bit of wear and tear along here with some fencing should round it off nicely. And with the building branded off with the police logos, we can move on to the second element, and that's going to be the jail exercise area I mentioned earlier on. I'm going to keep up the in-game basketball asset, really just to use as a guideline. Kind of want a similar scale within the yard, but I definitely do not want the same bright colours, it doesn't seem appropriate. I'm going to draw these courts out manually using the same net tool lanes that we used for the big H's on the helicopter landing spots. So again, I'll mix and match the snapping options as and when required to get these things in place. Starting from the outside, I'll get a rough outline and I'll check that's going to be enough space to actually build one on. Drawing a little halfway marker here should give us a reference point, that's all that's going in for. Points where I'm not happy with the size of what I've drawn, I'm just going to use move it and we'll nudge things into place. There's not much more explaining for code markings, so I'm just going to scoot through this and we'll add some props to it in just a minute. The obvious asset that needs to be added here, of course, is the basketball hoop stand. You can find that and find it. I added some simple benches around the court, but once that was in place, I wanted to add some exercise machinery. This is a sunny map, remember it doesn't rain, so having these outside I think is pretty appropriate. There's a good mix of gym assets here and find it, so I'm going to add some parallel bars, push-up bars, little park rollers, and chest pressed. Once that's fenced off, I reckon it came out looking pretty good. So we'll come back to this area, we'll add a few decals, but that'll do for now, let's move on. And on to the third and final element of this section now. I did knock up a quick park outline earlier, but that can be improved by some margin. So I'm going to delete what was here earlier and I'm going to make a little pool of reflection. This can be a spot where law enforcement can come and get their thoughts together after a rough day maybe, and it does give me a nice excuse to get these sweet reflective surfaces in action again. I'm going to go for the blue one this time and it looks amazing, doesn't it? The retaining wall along the inside of the pool gives us a little lipped border effect. I saw this on Discord the other week, really nice effect, works amazing with the reflective water. To finish this element, I'm going to add a simple grass surface, some seating and some trash bins, and we're going to have some very light tree work on here. And that's come out as a super simple but really elegant addition to the facility. Love that, happy days. I revisited the exercise area. I was a little concerned about the open nature of the back fence, so I decided to come back and add some additional hedging. I think having the public being able to walk straight up to the fence might not be the best idea. In fairness, it's still not really looking the most secure. I think you could throw things over that fence pretty easily, but it'll do for me. We move on. I want to get a little bit of fence work here done. Then I'm going to connect a few more areas up with the invisible paths. Swinging back over to the helicopter area, going to create a little bit of a rougher surface, to the complex. We're going to add some of Sully's riverbed surfaces. It's a pretty good fit. Then I went and added a few smaller bushes, and I guess it's probably a good idea to keep the taller trees a bit further away from the helicopter flight paths. Well, that's if we actually had helicopters flying in here, but you know what I mean. Speaking of trees, let's give the complex a bit of privacy with surrounding the trees. I'm going to use a mix of deciduous, and I'm going to add some extra spruces for height, some hickories for colour, and then we just use the oaks to fill a few gaps. I did want a nice thick cover of trees, so kept Anarchy on and then just manually deleted the ones that appeared on the roads or any buildings. One really nice addition to this build is adding some lighting to the helipads so it can be operational in the dark. There's quite a few lights you can choose from for the ground, and I've gone for the driveway lights for the big H markings. They should light up pretty well at night time, and I'm going to give it a double lining just for a more pronounced effect. I could have been doing with the Control-C mod for copy and paste, but it wasn't on the PDX platform at the time of recording. It is back now, which I'm really happy to see, so go check that one out. Let's have a look at this at night, and that looks pretty cool. Can look a little blocky at times, but what can you do? To complement the look, I'm going to add some safety lighting to the pathwork now. I found the ground light mid-range was a good choice here. If you're doing the same yourself, switching on to night mode seemed a little bit easier for getting consistently spaced placement of the lights. There we go. That's making it stand out now, isn't it? Yeah, perfect. Custom car parks pretty much feature on most of the videos I do now, so I'm not going to spend too much time in these for this video, but I will be creating two distinct styles here. One will be lightly decorated with white lining, but it will be a bit heavier on the plants with some shaded vegetation. The second car park at the back will have some walls put in place, and it's going to have some unique markings using the net lane functionality again. The same stuff we were using to make the basketball courts earlier. On both I'll be adding hedging, decals to dirty the thing up. We're going to add some more decals to give it a worn effect, and I'll add some appropriate lighting, and the lighting I'm going to use will pretty much mirror the vanilla one. I'll amend that vanilla one as well to blend in with the smaller custom car parks while we're at it. This shouldn't take too long to get through, so I'm going to pop it on a short time lapse and I'll catch up with you in a minute. Now, just a couple of finishing touches. This entrance beside the choppers wasn't very secure, so we'll get a checkpoint and we'll get barriers up, and that should look a bit more like part. I want to find a few more appropriate decals here and here. I reckon I should have a few bollards here. We don't want anyone mowing down on the path by some wayward driver. So let's get that blocked off with some bollards. And let's get the last few props extended off and repeated until they reach the edge of the network at the road. Well, not gonna lie, that was a lot of work. I think expanding this big asset out was certainly worth the time. Being able to find assets with the same colour scheme and adding those police signs binded everything together quite nicely. Hooking up the jail buildings together and making those secure walkways work pretty nicely. I particularly like the raised one connecting the jails to the main police headquarter building. The long pool of reflection runs perfectly along the longer shooting range facility. I think they work quite nicely together. And from the back you can see that we've used the same building a few times, but by changing that orientation, we can get away with it looking too repetitive. We can have a quick closer look at the outdoor exercise area here. It's looking pretty good. And this view will give a better view in terms of how it fits in with the wider context of the whole complex. Extending out the detailing from the main building worked well here, and those helicopter buildings slotted in there really nicely too. There are still a few areas to develop around the complex, both along the side of it to the west and directly in front of the main entrance. So if anyone's got some interesting ideas, drop them in the comments, I do read them all. We can take a look at the nighttime view and see how those lights look that we added. Nice effect really, and I think that shot really shows the scale of the development today. And we've got a bit of an eclipse going on with some northern lights as well. Nice. As always, thank you very much to the folks supporting the channel for Patreon and YouTube membership. It is very much appreciated. Thank you to everybody here that made it to the end for watching. I do appreciate that as well. Cheers. If you've enjoyed the build today, do make sure you're subscribed, drop a like or a comment, it does help, and feel free to check out these other builds while you're here. I'm sure you'll enjoy them.